let's look at the CSS Position Property. So position allows us to sort of move elements around on the screen using more or less like a coordinate system, and it bypasses the user's flow, or the flow of the browser as it renders. One thing I suggest is that try to avoid this positioning if you can accomplish that task with flow. So the flow is usually a better choice unless positioning makes sense. So just be careful, like you shouldn't be turning everything into position absolute. Very few things on your page will probably be absolutely positioned. So there are a few different states or values for the position. There's static, which is what all elements are by default. There's relative, absolute, and fixed. So I have an example here to demonstrate these things. So on the screen, I've just got 6 boxes, and if we look in my HTML, you can see it's just 6 divs on the page, and I just have some CSS here to just sort of color them so you can see and compare them differently. So let's first look at position relative. So I'm going to target box 2, and I'm going to set it to position relative. So remember that static is the default, so we're not even going to talk about static. So relative is the first value for position that is different. So let's go back to my browser, and so we targeted box 2 and we set it to position relative, and nothing happens. It looks exactly the same as before. Now what we can do with position is we can give the box either a top and left, or top or left, or bottom or right coordinate. And that allows us to move the box in context. So let's go for an example here. Let's say we give it a top of 25px. Go back to the browser, and there you go. You can see the box is now shifted down 25px. So it's shifted down 25px from where it used to be. And if we look right here, you can see it's actually covering over top of box 3. So let's go back, let's put a left on it. Let's say 25px again. Now you can see, look, the box is shifted down and over 25px. And this is relative to where it would have been in the flow. And you'll notice there's still this sort of separator space in here as though the box was actually still in the flow. So position relative allows us to move a box as though it's still in the flow. Okay, so let's look at another one here. Let's go to box 4, and I want to set it to position absolute. Okay, so before I save this, let's go look at where box 4 is. You can see it's right here, and box 5 is kind of coming after it. All right, so let's go back. We'll save this. All right, so here we go. So now we can see box 3, we can see box 4, and box 5 disappeared. So where did box 5 go? Well, box 5 is actually behind box 4 now. So similar to float, when you absolutely position something, you're removing that element from the flow, and other elements can go up behind it. So let's just give this a top and left here. Top of 25px and a left of 25px. I'll go back to the browser, and there we go. So now we can see box 5, but where did box 4 go? So you may have expected it to look like box 3, but it hasn't. It's actually up here now. It's at the top. So let's change these numbers a little bit. Let's make them real big. So let's go 75. And I'll go back to the browser, and now you can see here. So what's happening, that by default, when you absolutely position something, you're positioning it against its parent element that is also positioned. In this situation, the body element is positioned. So we're 75 pixels down from the top of the body and 75 pixels in from the left of the body. And you can see all the other boxes are acting as though that box doesn't even exist on the page. So if we go back and change one of these, let's change the width to, or the left to 200px. We'll go back here. You can see we're moving it based on the body element. So let's take another look here at position absolute. Let's go and look at the box to H2. and let's move it around. So let's set it to position absolute, and let's give it a left. Let's do something different. Let's do right of 10px and bottom of 10px. Okay, so look, we moved the h2, which is this right here. And you'll notice that I gave it position absolute, just like box 4, and I gave it just coordinates. Instead, I used right and bottom this time. But it's not at the right and bottom of the page. It's not way down over here. It's at the right and bottom of the yellow box. When we set the position, so right here we've set box 2 to position relative, we've created a new positioning context. So now we're moving the h2 relative to its parent element. So this 10px is relative to box 2's position. And if I was to move box 2 around, let's say I change it to 200 on the top, you'll notice that the h2 moves around with it. So the h2's absolute position in this situation is moving relative to its parent element. And the same thing would happen if I was to target box 4's h2. So box 4 is set to position absolute. So that creates a new positioning context. So any position children inside it will also use it as their relative parent. So let's go 15px. All right, so there we go. We're moving the h2 for box 4 around, and it's moving based on where box 4 is. So as a summary here, when we absolutely position something, it moves the coordinates that we choose are relative to its parent that is also positioned. By default, that is the body. But if we set position relative or absolute on the parent, then these coordinates are relative to that. Okay, so that's sort of relative and absolute, and static is the default. So the last one we have is fixed. So I'm just going to target box 6 here and set it to position fixed. And also let's give it some coordinates here. Bottom 0 and right 0. Okay, so this is the new one, position fixed. So there it is right there on my screen. And notice as I scroll, it doesn't move with the scroll. So position fixed allows us to completely remove something from the flow and position it to the window itself. So we're positioning to the bottom right-hand corner of the window, and if we scroll, it just won't move. So we have 3 possibilities for position. We have position relative, which allows us to move something from where that element would be in the flow. We have position absolute, which allows us to move something and completely remove that element from the flow. And then we have fixed, which allows us to attach something to the window. And if we scroll, it won't move.